Every alien feared him. She trembled at the name of the human warrior. Alarms screamed through the command deck, and I gripped the edge of my console, because the numbers on my screen cannot be true. 6 cruisers, 1 tender. A full battle line, and every single shield reading is falling at the same moment, as if some invisible hand is reaching through space and switching us off one system at a time. My name is Kalis Dorn, and I am the commander of the Ashlight Vigil, flagship of the Concorde's 3rd Fleet. 10 minutes ago, I gave the order to corner a small human ship near the Thren debris field. It was supposed to be simple. A salvage crew, 12 unarmed workers, a vessel held together with old parts and stubborn hope. My orders were to board them, question them, and take what we needed. I have given that order 100 times against 100 different peoples, and it has never once failed. It is failing now. Oss, my sensor officer, makes a sound I have never heard him make before. He is Threll, a species known across the Concorde for calm nerves and colder blood than mine. But right now his hands are shaking over his console, and when he turns his display toward me, his voice comes out thin and small. "Commander," he says, "there is one ship inbound from the outer field, only one, and it is not slowing down." I look at the screen, and I see a single signature, small and fast, cutting through the drifting metal of the debris field at a speed our own engines are not built to survive. I almost laugh. One ship, one small human vessel, against my entire formation. I open a channel to my weapons officer and tell him to lock every gun we have on the newcomer. He tries. He fails. The moment the targeting system reaches for the little ship, our own weapons controls go dark. One console after another, as if something on the other end of that signal reached inside our ship and simply turned the lights off. A voice comes through our open channel before I can give another order. It is calm. It is quiet. It does not sound like the voice of a man who is afraid, or angry, or even excited. It sounds like a man who is disappointed, the way a teacher sounds when a student has made a mistake they were warned about. "You picked the wrong crew to corner," the voice says. "They are not soldiers. They are not fighters. You knew that before you locked your weapons on them." I ask who is speaking. I already suspect the answer, because every officer in the Concorde has heard the stories, even if most of us treated them as exaggeration, campfire tales meant to frighten new recruits. "My name is Daniel Everhart," the voice says. "I fly the Kestrel, and right now, you are pointing your guns at people who never asked to be part of your war." I tell him the doctrine of the Concorde, the rule that any vessel in contested space is a legitimate target, the rule that has guided every fleet action I have ever taken part in. I expect him to argue with me, to try and convince me his cause is right and mine is wrong. He does not. "I know your doctrine," he says. "I read it before I ever left home. I am not calling to debate policy with you, Commander. I am calling because I think you should remember this conversation the next time someone hands you an order like the one you just gave." Before I can answer, my shields fail completely. Every alarm on the command deck falls silent at once, not because the danger has passed, but because there is nothing left for them to warn me about. My ship sits dead in space, weapons offline, engines idling, completely at the mercy of a single small vessel that could, if its pilot wished, end every life on board with a single strike. He does not fire. Instead, one by one, the weapons on every ship in my formation go dark, disabled without a single shot fired, without a single hull breached, without a single life lost. It is not a battle. A battle means two sides fighting for an outcome. What happens to my fleet in the next few minutes is something else entirely, something closer to a lesson delivered by a very patient teacher to a very foolish student. When it is finished, the small ship called the Kestrel simply turns and returns to the debris field, escorting the salvage crew safely out of the system, leaving my entire formation drifting and humiliated, but alive. I do not report the full truth of what happened that day to Concorde Command. I tell them we encountered a minor technical failure and withdrew for repairs. It is not entirely a lie. But I know, sitting alone in my quarters that night, staring at the ceiling instead of sleeping, that something inside me has changed. I have met the human warrior the old stories speak of, and I understand now why every experienced officer in the Concorde goes quiet whenever his name is mentioned. It takes me 3 more years to learn his full story, and I gather it slowly, piece by piece, from other officers, from captured records, from a Threll historian named Van, who spent a decade studying human conflicts before the war began. What I learn changes the way I see everything. Daniel Everhart was not born a warrior. He grew up on a farming colony called Ashwell, a quiet world with wide fields and slow rivers, the kind of place where nothing dangerous ever seemed to happen. His parents grew grain and kept small animals, and by every account, he was an ordinary child, more interested in fixing broken machines than in fighting anyone. Everything changed when he was 17. A raiding group, not from the Concord but from an independent faction, operating outside any recognized authority, attacked Ashwell, hoping to steal grain stores and machinery parts. The colony had almost no defense. Local security forces were outmatched within minutes. Daniel was in a maintenance shed on the edge of the colony when the attack began, repairing a harvesting machine with his younger sister Mara, who was 12 years old at the time. When the first explosions reached their part of the colony, Daniel did not run for the shelters. He picked up the tools nearest to him, an old cutting torch and a length of metal pipe, and instead of hiding, he moved toward the sound of danger, pulling children out of a collapsing storage building before the raiders reached it. He was not skilled. He was not trained. He was simply unwilling to let anyone smaller than him get hurt while he still had breath in his body. By the time colony defense forces arrived to push the raiders back, Daniel had already saved 11 people, working alone, using nothing but farming tools and raw determination. That night changed him completely. He joined a defense training program the following year, and everyone who worked with him during that time says the same thing. He was not the strongest recruit. He was not the fastest. He was not naturally gifted in any way that set him apart from 100 other young trainees. What set him apart was that he never stopped. Where others grew tired, he kept training. Where others accepted defeat in a simulation, he ran it again, and again, and again, until he understood exactly why he had failed and fixed it. His instructors described him as relentless, not because he was driven by ambition or glory, but because every time he closed his eyes, he saw his sister's frightened face in that collapsing building, and he decided that feeling was something he would never allow another person to experience if he could help it. Van, the Threll historian, told me something that stayed with me long after our conversation ended. He said that human strength does not come from a single powerful individual, the way it often does in other species. It comes from the fact that ordinary humans, given enough reason, refuse to remain ordinary. Daniel Everhart was not chosen by his people to become a legend. He simply decided, on one terrible night on a quiet farming colony, that he would rather stand and fight than watch someone smaller than him suffer, and he never let that decision go. By the time the Consolidation War began, Daniel was flying the Kestrel, a converted salvage vessel that most military analysts in the Concord considered barely functional by combat standards. It had almost no weapons compared to a proper warship. Its armor was thin, its engines, while fast, were not built for sustained combat. And yet, across the early years of the war, the Kestrel became a name that spread through Concord fleets faster than any official warning ever could. Wherever a small, defenseless group of humans or their allies found themselves cornered by a larger force, there was a chance, sometimes small and sometimes surprisingly large, that a single ship would appear from nowhere and change everything. He never sought out Concord warships to challenge them directly. He was not interested in conquest, and he never claimed territory in his own name. Every documented encounter with him followed the same pattern: a vulnerable ship or colony under threat, a Concord force moving to attack it, and Daniel Everhart arriving, always calm, always giving one warning before he acted, always choosing to disable rather than destroy whenever it was possible. I asked Van once why the Concord did not simply send an overwhelming force to eliminate him permanently, rather than allowing his reputation to grow with each encounter. Van's answer was simple, and it disturbed me more than any battle report I had ever read. They tried 3 times, he told me. Full battle groups, dozens of ships, some of the best tacticians the Concord had. Each time, Daniel Everhart did not need to destroy them to win. He needed only to survive long enough, and to fight smart enough, that the attacking force lost confidence in their own strength. A fleet that no longer believes it can win has already lost, even before the last shot is fired. I began to understand, through story after story, that Daniel's true weapon was never his ship or his weapon systems. It was his refusal to be predictable, combined with an almost unnatural patience that allowed him to wait for exactly the right moment to act. He studied every opponent before engaging them. He learned the habits of conquered commanders, the way they thought, the mistakes they were likely to make under pressure. By the time most commanders realized they were fighting him, the outcome of the engagement had already been decided, simply because he understood them better than they understood themselves. There is one story Van told me that I have never been able to forget, even now, years later. It happened during the second year of the war, near a mining colony called Farron's Hollow, home to a small population of humans and a handful of allied species who had settled there peacefully, mining rare minerals and living quietly away from the larger conflict. A Concord commander named Talric Sen, ambitious and eager to prove himself, decided that Farron's Hollow would make an easy target, a way to secure resources and demonstrate his strength to his superiors. He led 3 warships to the colony, expecting no resistance beyond the colony's minimal defense grid. He did not expect Daniel Everhart to already be there, having arrived 2 days earlier after receiving word from a trading contact that the colony might be at risk. When Talric's ships entered the system, Daniel did not immediately reveal himself. Instead, he waited, watching, learning the formation and timing of the approaching fleet. When Talric ordered his ships to begin bombardment of the colony's outer structures, intending to force a quick surrender, Daniel finally acted. He did not attack the warships directly. Instead, he used the Kestrel systems to create false readings across Talric's sensor network, making it appear as though a much larger force was approaching from behind the mining colony's asteroid field. Talric, already nervous about operating so far from Concord support lines, made the decision every experienced tactician fears making under pressure. He panicked. He ordered his ships to pull back and regroup, giving Daniel exactly the opening he needed. In the confusion of the retreat, Daniel disabled the lead warship's engines, leaving it stranded, while the other 2 ships, believing they were under a coordinated attack, continued their retreat without their commander. By the time Talric realized there was no larger force, only a single small ship and a very patient pilot, it was too late. Daniel offered him a choice: withdraw completely and never return to Farron's Hollow, or remain stranded until Concord rescue forces eventually arrived, an embarrassment that would follow Talric for the rest of his career. Talric chose to withdraw. The colony was never threatened again for the remainder of the war, and the story of how a single human pilot outsmarted an entire attack force without firing a single destructive shot spread through Concord ranks faster than any battle report ever could. It was after hearing this story that I finally understood something Van had been trying to tell me for months. Daniel Everhart was never trying to be a legend. He never gave interviews, never accepted honors, never allowed his image to be used in any kind of propaganda, even by his own people. When Human Command offered him a promotion that would have taken him away from active missions and placed him in a comfortable position of leadership, he refused it without hesitation. "I do not want a desk," he reportedly told them. "I want to be where I am needed." That single sentence, more than any battle report or tactical analysis, explained everything about why he had become the name that made an entire fleet go silent in a war room, the name that could stop 40 admirals from speaking at once. It was not fear of his weapons that silenced them. It was the understanding that here was a man who could not be bribed, could not be threatened, could not be tired into submission, because his only true motivation was protecting people who could not protect themselves. I met him once more, years after our first encounter near the Thren debris field. By this point, I had left the Concord's military entirely, unable to reconcile what I had learned about the war with the orders I was still expected to follow. I had taken a position helping coordinate humanitarian efforts for displaced colonies, caught between the fighting, work that felt small compared to my old command, but somehow more honest. Daniel arrived at a relief station I was overseeing, delivering supplies to a group of refugees who had lost their homes during a border skirmish. He did not recognize me at first, and I did not immediately remind him of who I had been. I simply watched him work, carrying supply crates alongside volunteers, speaking gently with frightened children, never once acting as though the work was beneath him or that he expected any recognition for doing it. When I finally introduced myself, reminding him of the day near Threnfield, he looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "I remember that day," he said quietly. "I am glad you are here doing this instead of what you were doing then." I asked him why he never stopped. Why after everything, after years of war and danger and exhaustion that must have worn on him in ways I could not fully imagine, he continued putting himself between danger and people who needed protection. His answer was simple. The same answer Van had described to me from his years of research. The same answer that explained everything about the man an entire fleet had once trembled to hear named. "Because someone has to," he said. "And I would rather it be someone who remembers what it felt like to be the one who was scared." I think about that conversation often, even now, long after the war finally ended, and the Concord and human worlds began the slow, difficult work of building something resembling peace between them. I think about a farming colony called Ashwell, and a frightened 17-year-old boy with nothing but a cutting torch and a length of pipe, refusing to let his sister and 11 strangers face danger alone. I think about how that single choice, made in a moment of fear on an ordinary night, grew into something that reshaped an entire war, not through conquest or destruction, but through one person's unwavering refusal to let the powerful prey upon the powerless. Every alien feared him, and for a long time I believed that fear was rooted in what he could do to us if provoked. I understand now that I was wrong. The fear was never about his weapons or his tactics, or the countless stories of fleets outsmarted and commanders humbled. The fear was rooted in something far more unsettling to anyone who has ever used strength to take advantage of the weak. It was the fear of facing someone who could not be corrupted, could not be exhausted, and could not be convinced that cruelty was ever an acceptable price for victory. She trembled at the name of the human warrior, and so did every commander I ever served beside, because deep down, every one of us understood the truth long before we were willing to admit it. Daniel Everhart was never the villain of anyone's story. He was simply the one reminder, standing quietly in the dark between the stars, that no matter how strong you believed yourself to be, there would always be someone willing to stand between you and those who could not stand for themselves. And that, more than any weapon ever built, was the thing every alien truly feared.